have what I think of as an intersection argument for the function argument. One is we've got functional parts, and I, etc. And we've got functional roles. Which we play, in which we participate as whole creatures or animals, right? So we've got a dizzying array of functional roles that we can play, and we've got a large number of functional parts that help us to play those roles. So we can play the violin, we learn to play the violin, in part because our hands are suited to playing violin. We can do mathematics, part because our brains are suited to do mathematics. And we take these two things together and we say, so what about us explains those two things? So, right, what about it explains those two things? So the claim is, well, what enables us to do all of those things and explains why we have all just these functional parts is because of our soul as rational. So when we want to know how it is we're so adaptable, we can play all these roles. And why it is we've got all the parts we have arranged in just the way we do, the best explanation is that it's because we've got a rational part. And so he says, okay, so what now? How does happiness get tied to the fact that we have a rational part? He says, well, so when we think about function, something else comes along with it. So now we're going to see what the role of introducing a function in particular is, and that's because of its connection to virtue or excellence. These are just two translations of the same. Aristotel. And the reason that some people don't like virtue is because they think that just has moral overtones. But you can talk about the virtues of a knife, or the virtues of a house, or the virtues of anything. So that, and besides, Aristotle is famous for having, with Plato, introduced us to virtue ethics. And so if you start translating arete as excellence, you lose that connection, right? And that seems like a cost. So I always translate it this way. Virtue. So how do virtues and functions get connected? Well, they get connected by a little induction. Aristotle says, well, look, the very same function can be exercised well or badly. And what enables, so you can play the violin well or badly, you can play the flute well or badly, everything that's got a functional characterization can be done well or badly. Your kidneys can function well or badly, your eyes can function well or badly. What ensures that they will function well are the arete, the virtues or excellences attached to the function. So virtue ensures well functioning. And so now that we've homed in on what it is, what our sort of activity is, what's involved in all the other things that we do, and is connected to or explains why we've got the functional parts that we do, we home in on rational activity, the activities of this. So the soul has a rational part. That's activity. Function and activity are pretty much the same thing. You can think of the function activated as the activity, or actually it's probably just as easy just to think that it is the activity. So now we've got, right, tie those things together, and you've got what's it to live well as a human being? Well, it's to carry out one function in particular well. And what function is that? It's rational activity. And when do you do it well? You do it well when you've got all the virtues and excellences that are tied to rational activity. So think about just a simple case. Think about making choices as a result of which you'll do the right thing, or the thing that's best for you. You'll maximize your happiness. Put your phone away, please. Or whatever it is you're looking at. Are you looking at something? You look as if you're looking at something. Don?
I was just looking down.
Oh, I thought you were looking at your phone. When my children do that, it's always because down here they've got their phone, but you must be different. It's okay. Okay. No, it's all right. Okay. So, well functioning, right? It's your rational activity that if you carry that out well, you'll be doing well what human beings do, right? So you've got to get the virtues and excellences tied to rational activity. So now what you want to do is ask, well, what's rational activity? And we've already got a clue in Book 1, Chapter 7, that it's complicated, because he says, well, the rational part has got two sides to it. One part that can listen to reason, and the other part, think spirited part of the soul, and the other part that can actually generate explanatory reasons, right? So, right, you have to think that, right, on the one hand, when reason speaks to you, you may be able to understand them, but you may not be able to generate the reasons yourself. You're able to follow when somebody gives them to you, but you couldn't generate. So think of the case where you consult an expert. Let's suppose you're mathematically inept, and you want to know what the product of 9 and 9 is. So you can't calculate it, right? So you say, when you multiply 9 by 9, what do you get? And you ask somebody who does know how to calculate it, and hasn't just learned the 9 times table off by heart, says it's 81. Right? What's the square root of, right, 36? I don't know. What is that? I think it must be 6. So what's the square root of 36? Well, you get very complicated, right? Well, those are simple, but they can be very complicated calculations. So when you consult somebody who knows how to do the calculation, you've actually got a source of reasons, not just somebody who can follow reasons once they've been told what they are. So again, think about the spirited part of the soul and the rational part of the soul. We're going to get that in a second. So, there are two sorts of loci for virtue in connection to the rational part. One is being really good at generating explanations and reasons for things, and being very good at following them when they're generated. And notice that you can be very good at one and very bad at the other. So suppose you're very good at reasoning. So you think, I wonder what I should have for lunch today. Maybe I should have a Big Mac with double cheese and an ice cream sundae. I'm going to have that, right? And but you've calculated that, right? And you've made a mistake, right? Because your calculation is wrong. That's not the best thing to have for lunch. You should be having the spinach salad, right? It's always the right choice. So, right, you should be having the spinach salad, but you're going to go for that, the Big Mac and fries and all that stuff that's going to clog your arteries, make you obese, right? But now a different one. You do the calculation right. You say, I should have the spinach salad. But when you get to the moment of ordering, you think, no, I'll have the pig. Now you did the calculation right, but the other part of your soul, the part that's supposed to follow, we know we do this all the time, right? We do all the calculation, but then at the last moment, we flip over to the other side and we think, this just wants a minimum vote. Okay. So you can have two loci of error, right? And if you've got the virtues, you won't make either of those errors. You'll always do your calculating right, and you'll always follow the calculation that you do. So think again about Plato. the guardians are on the side of reason. Spirit is on the side of reason if you've been well brought up. So now let's go back. You've got good habits. So you've good eating habits. You already, even before you know the reason, why should I choose? So there's this. You know you should choose the spinach salad, but you don't know why. You haven't been able to calculate the reason. Now when you're old enough and wise enough to understand, and now you can be given a reason. It's got to do with cholesterol, it's got to do with your arteries, it's got to do with, right, all of this stuff. And now you think, oh, I see, so I do the right thing, but now I see why I should. Notice that when we've been brought up in a certain way with certain habits, and then we discover that there's no justifying reason for them, and then we feel the other way around, right? We think, that's silly, why should I keep doing that? There's really no justifying reason for it at all. And that happens when we make, social advances of various sorts. We see that certain kinds of things we all were brought up to believe and feel are actually based on nothing at all. Okay, so that's the function is introduced, and it's a very clever move on Aristotle's part, and here's why. Because it instantly brings into play the virtues. And so what he's done is to connect two things together, right? Happiness, doing well in life, with doing well what's the most important thing for you to do well, namely these rational activities, because they govern all the rest. How should you use your eyes? What should you use your hands to do? What decisions should you make? What role should you play? It's not just the roles on the parts, so it's what you do with them. And that comes from your sort of capacity to reason and act on reasons. That's the thought. And then we get as a kind of give me because of the connection already established between function, you can read it at the end of the Republic, between function and virtue, or excellence. What is it that enables you to do the function? Well, that's what we need to find. If we found those things, then we'd know what we need to develop by way of habits in order to ensure that we perform our function. So that's the bottom line of the function argument. It's very, in a way, it's very simple, and I think it's usually misrepresented. It's all the evidence for it is presented. It's not presupposing, as you often hear, some stuff from Aristotle's biology or from his metaphysics. You can see that it's not like that at all, right? For one thing, he gives examples of functional roles that are not biological ones. Flute player, biology going to tell you about that, right? So it's not about the biological foundations of the ethics, and it's not about the metaphysical foundations. It's organizing your thoughts, right? Giving you devices to organize your thoughts on the basis of what I'm going to tell you, and you're supposed to be able to see on that basis why you should go for those. Okay, so one thing that has puzzled people, and I'm just going to mention it, is Aristotle says, well, we're looking for the special function, right? We're looking for the thing that's special to human beings and not something that they share with other animals like perception or with plants like growth and nutrition. And people have said, oh, well, why is what's special so important? And then they've given great examples like only human beings prostitute themselves. Why isn't that the function? Right. There's a lot of that. Right? And really it takes about, how would I say again, elementary considerations show that that can't be right. And because the thought is not, what you're looking for, right, the reason you're looking for a special function is because it's quite clear that human beings differ from other animals in a whole lot of ways. Now we've got a focus for the difference, right? We don't occupy functional roles by nature. We can choose and deliberate about which ones. We don't use our body parts simply in the way we do, simply by nature. We actually can choose how to move them. So we don't play, Bach's cello suites by nature. We have to learn how to do it. But our hands are things that we can use to do something that, as it were, nature didn't have in mind. It wasn't as if, God was up there thinking, let's make them able to play Bach, because that way when they get to heaven, I'll have something to listen to. He didn't do that. It's rather that right? One of the things we can do with our hands, because they've been adapted for other things, is play the marionette. So the reason why we want to do this is that if we stopped short, right, of the rational part, we wouldn't have an explanation for our capacity to play all these functional roles. And moreover, we wouldn't have an explanation for why it is these different parts of us can be adapted to play those different functional roles. So when we look to say, well, why is that? Then we realize, so to speak, that there's a structure, as he says, right? There's something over and above all those functions that guides, controls, and does them. And it's that that's pretty crucial to how well you do what you do, right? So now that gets the virtues in. Okay. Now we got just a reminder, and it's a very important one. I went through it last time, but let me just mention it again, that Aristotle doesn't just give you this as an argument to be accepted on its own authority. Right at the beginning of Book 1, Chapter 8, he reminds us that the argument is only as good as its capacity to organize the things we already find credible and believe. So if it flies in the face of what our beliefs based on our lives, because think again, yeah, but look, the cookbook is supposed to be not just, in accord with chemistry and biology. The food is supposed to taste good. That's what we want it for. If somebody came along and said, yeah, I know the food tastes terrible, but everything is right, you just think that the cookbook writer hadn't a clue about what the point of a cookbook was. So what you want is, right, you want the theory that we're getting, the picture of ourselves that we're getting, should accord with things we can find credible on the basis of our experience of life. If it just flies against that, so if you were told that, you know what's the best kind of life for a person, here's what you want to do. You want to build a nice big tall pillar, about 65 feet tall, climb up on the top of it and sit there. St. Simon Sileides did this, it's a great Glenwell film. He climbed to the top and he sat up there. He lived the life of, he was called St. Simon Stylites because of style. It's the genitive of the word for style is for pillar. They climbed up there. And if you think, that can't be right. I mean, it's not like you need to do an experiment, like build a pillar and climb up there and sit there for 20 years to decide whether that's the best kind of life, any more than you need to do this. You taste the food that's been prepared, and you really don't like it. Then it doesn't say anything to you, this cookbook. It's useless to you, right? Even if there's something else it gets right. As he says in Book 10, Chapter 8, at the end of it, he says, look, now that you've heard everything I have to say, right, you have to judge it by your own life experiences. And if it fits, you should believe it, and if it doesn't, you should dismiss it as mere words. It's very important to bear that in mind, right? So the acid test of a lifesmanship book is that when we follow the recipes, our lives go well. If they don't, there can't be a getting it right. That's true to some other thing altogether. Okay. So once we're there, we can flip to, after there's much interesting discussion in Book 1 about, call no man happy until he is dead, what's the role of luck in life, and all the other stuff that we're not going to look at. But instead, we're going to flip to the psychology, the next step that connects directly to the function argument. So we're not Aristotle scholars these days in this class. We're trying to get at the ethical doctrines. So let's go to 113. So page 18, if you have my version. If you are foolish enough not to have it, then it's 1102 A, 5 or 6. Since happiness is some activity of the soul in accord with complete virtue, we must investigate virtue, since maybe that way we will also get a better theoretical grasp on happiness, right? We know what it is, some kind of activity. Now if we investigate the virtues, we'll see what kind of And it seems too that someone who is truly a politician, that is, somebody who's mastered the art of politics, which is what ethics is a part of, will have worked most on virtue, since he wishes to make the citizens good and obedient to the laws, right? So what a good politician wanted to do, like a good person, a good parent, is to give you the habits that will result in you having the dispositions to do the very things that will constitute happiness. So that when you learn why you should do those things, you think, oh, I'm already disposed to do those, but now I see why doing them is good. Remember that this is exactly what goes on in the Republic, right? The argument of the Republic is, don't try to convince Thrasymachus, he's a skeptic, right? Rather, instead, go to Glaucon and Adeimantus. Well, what are they like that Thrasymachus is not like? Well, they've already got good habits. They say, well, we know we should be just. We're not disputing that. What we want to do is understand what the reasons are to be just, right? Why is it that this is the right way to be? We accept that it is, and we're disposed to do what justice requires, but what we don't get is we don't understand how it can be right, given Thrasymachus' arguments. So what the skeptic says, you know, all those habits of yours are baseless, right? They're not going to serve you well. Here's the skeptical argument. And Plato says, well, skeptics can be very hard to refute, and in the case of Thrasymachus, it's because they don't have the right habits. Right? They'll reject it because when they try it on their life, right, they won't like what they do. So he goes to Glaucon and Adeimantus, who have the right habits. They listen to reason, right? But they don't know yet what the reasons are. They're looking for an explanation that backs up their way of life. So I think this is a very stylish way to do philosophy, because I don't think that philosophy has the authority to change our lives. Witness the history of philosophy, right? It just doesn't have that kind of torque. When we hear a skeptical argument, hey, you know, you might be dreaming, you've heard this one. In a minute, you wake up, you'll be in your... How do you know you're not? Oh, you hear it. Really, you can try. I know how to tell. The dreaming argument will just come back. You can have very vivid dreams. You're just dreaming. You do the tests. You're just dreaming. It's all just dreaming. When you hear it, this is typically not the reaction. Right? Oh, yeah, right. Great. That's right. I could be dreaming. Yeah. I don't know anything now. Oh, okay, that's cool. No. You think, oh, there's something wrong with that. I don't know what it is, but I'm certainly not. Right? I just know the conclusion is false. I don't know how to dismantle the argument. It'd be nice if I did, but I'm certainly not going to start trying to use that. Like, well, I just didn't do the paper because it's all a dream. Right? Try that. Let's see. I once taught a class on skepticism, and one of those students was just a die-hard skeptic. Right? He absolutely would not give in, and he wouldn't admit the reality of anything. And I said, well, what about the reality of grades? And he had a conversion experience right in front of my eyes. I go, well, grades are real. Well, once you give me grades, the rest follows pretty quickly, right? It's not hard to generate papers from grades and paper writers from papers and etc. So notice that is the issue. So skeptics like David Hume, or use skepticism, usually want to distinguish between when they're doing theory and they're all skeptics. Because he says, in my study I'm a skeptic, but when I'm playing backgammon with my friends, no, I take it off. It's just, I know there's no rational justification for it, but you can't live that way, a steady way. You've got to just get on, right? And I don't like that result. I don't want to be schizophrenic about it. So I can't tell you what the reasons are, but I'm just going to do it anyway. I don't really find that very appealing. So I think there's a better way to go, which is to say, no. The arguments don't have that Archimedean power to shift our whole lives over to somewhere else. Rather, what we do when what we want is a justification, a rationalization, a rational justification, perhaps a better way to put it, for what we do. And that can be used to tell us that some of the things we do are baseless, but can't be used in general, so to speak, to show that nothing we do has a base that is too strong. When we get an argument that we can't solve that threatens everything, like the skeptical argument, we tend to, as Aristotle does, we hive it off and say, well, we can't yet see exactly what's wrong with it. So it's an interesting object of theoretical study. But it doesn't have the capacity. I mean, go over to the physics department and tell them to stop doing what they're doing because they're just dreaming. And they don't know that they're not dreaming, or they first have to show that they're not dreaming. And they won't refute you. They'll just ignore you, which is exactly what they should do. Right? Yeah. So Aristotle's got the different approach, which I favor, which is that we look at all the things we already know are good and bad. We know that pain is not good. We know that pleasure is good. We know that being treated with respect is nice. We know that being loved and loving others are good and important things. We know how valuable friends are. We don't need an argument for that. Well, because that's the starting point of argument. It's not the end. Or it's not as if you have to wait to, wait a minute, before I form any friendships, I've got to be sure that it's justified kind of thing to do, right? Rather, what happens is we already find ourselves with friends, right? We already have parents. We already are part of a community. We're already speaking a language. Imagine if you started this way. Before I learn a language, I want to make sure that I learn the one that carves nature of the joints. I want to learn the logically perfect language. You know what will happen? You'll be brain damaged. Why? Well, because you won't learn anything, and by the time you get around to learning, it'll be too late. There's a famous Scottish experiment on it. Identical twins were born. The parents believed that if children were left to develop their own language, they would, of course, speak Hebrew, because that was the language God spoke. Go figure, right? And so they brought these two little children up, and they fed them and clothed them, but they never spoke to them, because they wanted to see what language the twins would speak to one another. And guess what? It wasn't Hebrew. They never learned to speak. That's the sort of issue. We already have taken so much on trust. So when the French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty writes about Descartes, he raises a key question which analytic philosophers, I think, have been a little slow to capitalize on, except perhaps for somebody like Wittgenstein, which is this. Descartes already begins to meditate in a universe of already existing discourse. He already has a language. He doesn't ask himself whether that's a trustworthy language, right? And so, for example, a lot of people have said, well, in French as in English, we have either inflected verbs or pronouns. So, cogito, inflected verb, or in English, I think, therefore I am. Well, suppose that you spoke a language that didn't have either inflected verbs or pronouns. Suppose that what you had was a language like this. There's thinking going on. You can't infer from that directly that there's somebody who's doing any thinking. Merleau-Ponty says there's a kind of grammatical or linguistic illusion that you're actually tracing out reality rather than projecting onto it the structure of language itself. So before we start doing any thinking at all, right, we've already taken on board millions and millions of things. We've taken on the language that we speak. We're already embedded in social relations with others. We're the child of someone, the brother of someone else, the friend of someone else. We're already either citizens or not citizens of the country we live in. Right, all of that stuff starts from day one. In fact, it starts nearly from conception. But you're being socialized, even the fetus, once it gets the central nervous system, starts hearing sounds, responds to anxiety levels in the mother, and so forth. A whole lot of things are going on already comes into the world with pre-socialized extent. So if you were thinking, I don't want to do anything that's not pure, I want to save myself for the truth, well, the result will be you'll be waiting a long time and nothing will happen. You'll be like the two twins in the Scottish cellar. You just won't develop anything at all. And it's very important to hold those thoughts clear, so that the thought is what we want to do is understand ourselves and see what's justified, right? Not to sort of start the whole ball rolling from entirely self-evident principles, which we can't do that. Okay, so now we've got the test. The test is ethics should be, and this is very important, it's often lost, ethics should be about how we live, and it should be credible on the basis of how we do live. So when we're told that we need a revolution in our values, we need to replace all of them with something better, it's going to take a lot to do that. Right? That's a real question of how much we'll see Nietzsche do this. Yeah, well, stands to reason, as he puts it. I'm not going to throw all that out. And that's the result of thousands of years of experience and life, in just the way that you wouldn't throw out all previous knowledge about how to cook. Right? I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to tell you a different story about why it is those things are valuable. Now that's right? That holds in place the values, but it changes the justificatory argument for them. So we're not going to justify them that way. We're going to justify them in a different way, a better way. And not all of them will be justified. Some of them will lose their value in just the way that we're already familiar with, because values disappear regularly and new ones appear. Right? We've got plenty of examples. Okay, so now 113, we pick up from there, and now we get the psychological background. And I'm just going to flip down. He excludes the vegetative part of the soul because there's very little we can do to grow, right? A lot of that just happens, so we can't do it well or badly or control it. But now he goes to of the so it's about 1102, 830, so about, if you've got page 19, about halfway down. Of the non-rational part, one part seems to be shared and vegetative. I mean the cause of nutrition and growth, so that's what we have in common with plants. That's all soul activity for Aristotle, because for him a soul is, well, like anima in Latin. It's just what animates. So anything that's animate has a soul. And psychos, ensouled, that was what makes you alive. For this sort of capacity of soul is one we suppose to be present in all things, though take in nourishment, even embryos. And this same one is also present in completely grown animals, since since that is more reasonable than to suppose a different one to be present in them. So we keep the same one. It's true that we stop growing. So we don't, but it would be a mistake to think that we lose that capacity of soul. It's rather the case that now it sustains us at a certain size. Hence, the virtue of this capacity is apparently something shared and not distinctively human. Right? There's nothing about it, but animals have it too. For this part, and this capacity, seem to be most active in sleep. And a good person and a bad one are least clearly distinguished during sleep. Right? You are still growing and metabolizing and digesting your food when you're asleep, but both good people and bad people can do that perfectly well. And then he's got a nice little riff, I'll just read it because Plato is already thinking about it. If you remember the opening of Book 9 of the Republic, where Plato talks about dreams and about how the tyrant in dreams, and other people too, there's no food they won't eat, they'll commit acts of cannibalism. There's no one they won't sleep with, they'll commit incest and all sorts of things. That's what dreams are like. He says, the tyrant's like that in his waking life. Right? What for you is just a dream. And he thinks maybe good people don't even have those kinds of dreams. But Aristotle pays a little bit of lip service to this idea. He says, the idea that good and bad people are pretty much the same when they're asleep lead people to say that the happy are no different from the wretched for half their lives, which makes perfect sense, since sleep is idleness of the soul in that respect, with reference to which it's said to be excellent or base. Unless, to some small extent, some movements do get through to us, and in this way the things that appear in the dreams of decent people are better than those of any random person. So the thought is, it might even be that, our dream, even though our rational capacities are kind of not fully operative in dreams, nonetheless, the dreams of good people might be better than the dreams of other ones. But that's enough about these things, and we should leave the nutritive part aside, since by nature it has no share in human virtue. You're not a good person because you metabolize well, or you digest your food well, or any of those things. He's so good at digesting. I don't think, right? Right. That's a bit like, I thought you had very nice handwriting in your paper. I love it. It's not really about the handwriting, though, is it? Another natural constituent of the soul, however, also seems to be non-rational, although it shares in reason in a way. For we praise the reason, that is the part of the soul that has reason, of a person with self-control and of a person without it, since it exhorts them correctly to what is best. But they also have by nature something else within them besides reason, apparently, which fights against reason and resists it. We're in Book 4 of the Republic. For exactly as with paralyzed limbs, when their owners deliberately choose to move them to the right, they do the contrary and move to the left. We have Parkinson's disease with spasm. So it is the case of the soul as well, since the impulses of people who lack self-control are in contrary directions. In the case of the body, to be sure, we see the part that's moving in the wrong direction, whereas in the case of the soul, we do not see it. But presumably, we should nonetheless acknowledge that in the soul as well, there's something besides reason countering it and going against it. And how it's different, though, is not important. Right? So we see from the issues of self-control and weakness of will, we see that merely reasoning correctly is not enough to act correctly. Some other part of you which can go against reason may push you to do the wrong thing, even though you reasoned correctly, right? But this part also has a share of reason, as we said. At any rate, it's obedient to the reason of a self-controlled person. And furthermore, that of a temperate and courageous person, presumably, listens still better, since there it chimes with reason in everything. So now let's take a look at the great divide. We've got vicious, lack of self-control, this is often called acrasia, or weakness of will. But it's better to say lack of self-control for reasons I could explain. Weakness of will, self-control, and virtuous. We've got 4 types. So if we're looking at the Republic, these people are excluded from the Callipolis because you can't, they're psychopaths, basically. You can't do anything with them. They're irremediably vicious, and the best thing for them and for everybody else is to incarcerate them, or, as Plato says, put them to death. Right? Why? Well, they can't live a happy life themselves, and they'll make our lives miserable as well, so what's the point of them? And so those are excluded, but once those are excluded, we're back in Platonic territory. So those are going to be mapped onto by characters we've already met in the Republic. So what's the difference, though, between people who are self-controlled and people who are virtuous? I mean, why isn't virtue self-control? And let me just give, this is going to come back to and not to haunt us, and we're going to talk about it when we do Kant, because Kant actually, in a way, thinks that self-control is better than virtue. So, because the thought is, well, the virtuous person just doesn't see the temptation, right? They're not, so when they go to get lunch, they don't even consider the Big Mac with the cheese. It's not like they're attracted to it, but they fight down their attraction. They just don't like Big Macs with cheese. They like spinach salads. And Kant, in a way, thinks the way a lot of moralists do, which is if you're not sacrificing something, why is it so good? You've got to be making, morality requires sacrifice. Nietzsche is going to go to Kant with this one, right? You know, if you're not actually giving up something you like, if you're just doing it because you like it, that's not virtuous. The virtuous person struggles, right, but wins. A strong will. Something Germanic about that, I think. The triumph of the will, you know, is a great Lenny Regan-style film about the Olympics. And the Olympics that took place in Nazi Germany with Hitler in the box. There's something about it, something Teutonic and ever so slightly fascistic, it seems to me, about the notion of the triumph of the will. But Aristotle and Plato don't think that's, they think that's a poor second. That's good. It's much better than lacking self-control or being vicious, but it's not as good as being virtuous. And the question is, how do they put those two things together? So already in 113, you have a schematic version of the answer. He says, well, in the virtuous person, the part that listens to reason chimes with reason in everything. And in the self-control person, it at least obeys reason. So there's a difference between chiming with reason in everything and obeying reason. And so what is it to chime with reason in everything? Well, we've got a simple model, right? So consider the difference between the person who's tempted by the Big Mac, but listens to reason and pushes aside their desire for the Big Mac and eats the salad. Now here's what that's typically like. I'm sure you've all done it, right? Something like this. Now you're eating the salad. And you're looking at the guy next to the table eating the Big Mac. And you start dreaming, you know, French fries appear to you, right? I mean, we do this regularly, right? When we don't do what we want in real life, we kind of start fantasizing to make it bearable. So you eat the salad, hankering after the hamburger, right? And you don't fully enjoy it. Why not? You don't fully enjoy it because it's actually frustrating your appetite. You are doing what reason tells you, but appetite is saying, well, what about me? I wanted the Big Mac, right? Like a whiny baby inside demanding that it get what it wants. So what's the difference in the virtuous person? Well, in the virtuous person, appetite wants the spinach salad. There's no hankering after something else. It doesn't like hamburgers with cheese and French fries. It likes spinach salad. So it chimes with reason. Reason doesn't have to make it do anything or force it down, right? It doesn't have to do any of that. Rather, if you've already been brought up well, you already have good eating habits, and when you hear what good eating habits are and why you should have them, you don't have to change your life, right? Because you've already got the very habits that reason would put in you if it could do that. That's the difference. And so the difference between the virtuous person and the one with self-control is to be understood in terms of the relationship between the two rational parts of the soul, and as it were, how harmonious their relations are. And again, we're in the same territory as before the Republic. So, right, we want spirit, appetite, and reason all to sing the same song, all to be in harmony with one another. so that we can, out of many, as Buddhists, make ourselves one harmonious thing that acts in unison rather than in discord. That's the idea. If you keep the simple case in mind, the eating habit case, it generalizes to all the others, though they can be a little more complicated. Let me just give a different one. We're going to see this. We're not going to go through all the virtues. We're just going to look at the general definition of virtue and what it is. But yeah, take courage, for example. Well, courage is the state of you that enables you to handle your fears, threats, and danger as well. So the courageous person, for Aristotle, is not somebody who sticks to it no matter what, right? The courageous person is someone who measures threats correctly, isn't afraid of things that aren't threatening, but is properly afraid of ones that are, right? And he's contrasted with a coward who's afraid of too many things, and a foolhardy person who's afraid of too few. So the foolhardy person doesn't measure dangers correctly. The coward doesn't measure dangers correctly, magnifies, the other minimizes. The courageous person measures them correctly. I want to give you the picture of the measuring device, which I find is the most useful one to bring out of error generally, is that you want to be a reliable measuring device of value, and then respond appropriately to your correct measurements and evaluations. So now let's take a great leap forward and start at the top. Well, we're not taking a great leap forward in pages, but we're taking a great leap forward in thought. Beginning of Book 2, Chapter 1, virtue then is twofold, of thought and of character. And why? Well, look, we've got, and when we try to distinguish self-control from virtue, right, we need two parts of the soul, the part that reasons autonomously, and the part, this is part one, the part that obeys, part one, and has reason in that sense. So when we've got self-control, right, these two harmonize in, these two harmonize in virtue, not in self-control. In self-control, now we look up to the lack of self-control. The Socratic person is number, in his case, right, two controls one. So harmonize in the case of self-control, in the case of virtue, not in self-control, where one controls two. Right? So what's in control? It's just like in Plato, right? It can be your appetite. That means that when reason tells you what to do, if appetite doesn't agree, appetite determines what you do. You can be self-controlled, in which if appetite goes against reason, you do what reason says. Or the two can be in harmony, which is the ideal. Virtue, viciousness, you know, lies outside this categorization. And if you look up the huge index of the back, which I hope you've discovered, because it's a huge, real help to understanding. Because what it does is it doesn't just tell you where to look; it quotes all the relevant passages. So if it's like a glossary where you find everything kind of laid out. So it puts together everything Aristotle says about vice, for example, rather than you having to go look it all up. So if you go into that part and you look at vice, you see that it goes on for about one column of entries. Right? If you look at virtue, it goes on for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, nearly 6 columns. Aristotle has very little to say about vice by comparison with virtue. And in fact, there's a quite well-known article about the Nicomachean, a paper about the Nicomachean ethics, which is called Aristotle's Missing Theory of Vice. So there's a real question of how vice is to be fitted in. And in fact, it's a nice question for which there would be a special reward of some kind to anyone who, at the end of the Aristotle thing, feels empowered to tell me what they think the difference is between the vicious person and the others. So how are we to fit them into those? So it's not a trivial task, but if you've read The Republic, you ought to be able to do something to think about it. Okay.
I was wondering, so where does instrumental rationality fit into the picture of those 4 categories? Because I don't see, I see that there is akrasia. I don't see where like so you have a decisive reason to hold certain ends, but I don't see where in that case, if you fail to believe that certain things, certain means to that ends are necessary, then
I see your question. Yeah. Can I try to rephrase it for you? Yeah, so the question is, how are we to situate instrumental rationality in this picture? Instrumental rationality being calculating good means to ends. How is the determination of ends versus determination of means going to get played out in this picture? And that's a very good question. And in Book 6 of the Republic, of the Nicomachean Ethics, which we'll turn to next week, Aristotle tries to explain that it's actually rather subtle, right? So it's in part that what makes the end correct are the virtues of character, and what makes the means correct are your capacity to rationally calculate, which is situated in the rational part of the soul. So in order to do both, to get your means and ends correct, you have to have the right virtues in the part that obeys reason, and then you have to have the right calculation in the other part. So it goes like this. Now, reason figures out, right, what kinds of things would make life go best for a creature like you. Right? If you've been properly brought up, those are just the kinds of things that you're disposed to do. So when you now, having been brought up that way, calculate means to ends, both your ends and the means will be correct. Whereas in the case of the others, there'll be a couple of different errors. One is you don't get the end right because you've been badly brought up. So you think the good really is the hamburger, right? And that's not a result of an intellectual error. That's a result of the fact that that's what looks good to you because of what your habits are. So when we get to Book 6, we'll have to try to answer this in a subtle kind of way. But for now, it's just the thought is, well, we know there's something in us that tells us what to do on the basis of overall calculations of our good, and there's something in us that resists it. And then there are different relations between those two, depending on how harmonious they are. Is this all kind of clear? I told you we'd be doing the same thing over and over again. That's the whole point of it. Slightly different, right? But the overarching story is kind of the same. So once you get it, it's good. All right, now, so now we've got 2 locations for virtue, right? So we've got 1 and 2, right, these 2 things, and the different ways in which control can be partitioned among them. So now when we look at the part that reasons, we got virtue, it's sometimes called intellectual virtue or virtue of thought. Right, and then from this one, we get virtue of character. character, ethos, and ethos for habit are very close Greek words, so you might think virtue of character as virtue of what you get, a character of a certain sort, by getting the right habits. So think of it a very simple case again, and just make sure you have a clear in your mind and don't be distracted by complexity. They're all just complexities on the simple case. The virtuous person, right? Looking at the world, the person who's got good eating habits has the virtues connected with temperance. Has temperance in the exercise of appetites. Take in particular, eating. A virtuous person goes into the restaurant and looks at the menu, right, to see what's available. Their appetite, right, says, right, shows them the spinach salad has looking good, tasty, and to be eaten. And it shows them the hamburger as not looking good, tasty, and to be eaten. So it's just the way you feel a pull towards one and an aversion towards the other. That's the form that values enter into our lives. They don't enter in right this way. We think out a whole big load of things and then we do. It's rather that already our feelings are coloring the scene and telling us what's emotionally, what's morally salient. Let me give an example. So think of what it's like to be a socially anxious person. So when you're in groups, you feel socially awkward, anxious. And so when you go into a group, you already are seeing potential sources of aggression, attack, insecurity. You interpret the faces of people as hostile or unfriendly, right? You see threat everywhere because that's what it is to be socially anxious. It's to look at the world and see it that way. Take a socially confident person. Socially confident person looks at exactly the same room, sees exactly the same faces, but interprets them as, well, neutral, friendly, potentially, right? Anyway, no threat, right? Just people you might get to know, maybe you're attracted to some, you're not to others, but you don't feel worried about it, right? In the same way about everything, right? When you think about what anxieties and other distortions of feelings are like, you realize that our feelings color the whole map of the world for us with values, things to be averse to. Don't talk to that one, they don't look friendly. This one looks more friendly. That one's a threat. I should be on guard. I better be careful. This is a threatening situation. I should prepare myself for aggression. Maybe you're going to say something hostile, right? Should I worry about that? So when you're a young teacher, can be a real problem. You worry. Once you're too hostile, you think you're going to be everything as a form of attack. Then you get old and wise when you realize that, A, they don't know as much as you do. B, they're not trying to destroy you or anything. They just want to understand. So, you kind of roll with the punches a little better. And occasionally, of course, you do get somebody who does want to destroy you, and then you have to moderate your aggressive reactions so that you don't end up actually destroying them, or whatever it is, right? So, but look, think about it. Think about yourself. You already know a lot about what kind of a person you are. Just think about how you handle various kinds of situations. Now, so, how are you when you discover, when you walk into an exam phase, questions you don't prepare? Are you anxious before an exam, or are you fairly confident before an exam? Think about the difference that it makes in how you look at the questions. When you look at the exam paper when you tell it. You're already expecting now things to happen, right? Whereas the other person, yeah, I think I'll be able to do this, or, I can handle it. I can turn these questions around so that I can close it. I may not know the answer to these questions, but I know the answer to other questions that are just like them. And by sleight of hand and clever manipulation, I can give good answers even to the ones that are here. I can use the knowledge I've got. Not, I don't have it. I can, I've got some, I'll use it. And we're all like this about everything. Do you have to give a speech? Will that make you paralyzed, or will you just be able to function? You have to confront your friend about a puzzling or problematic issue that's going to, is a potential for hostility, does that scare the hell out of you, or do you think you can manage it all right? And it goes on like this, right? Do you worry about being in strange places? Do you care about traveling? Does it bother you if you don't know the language? These are all the ways, and they're already there. We go out into the world with this massive array of antennae that are sensitive to all kinds of things and that get us moving long before we do any thinking whatsoever. Thinking is slow, cautious, evaluates, but our lives have to be lived far more quickly than that. Right? When this animal comes towards you, you can't get out your iPad and start clicking through to see, is this one of the dangerous ones? Is that, right? By the time you open up your browser, the thing will either have eaten you or not. So, right, you've got to get moving fast. We need fast, dirty ways of responding to the world as well as slow, cautious ones. The fast, dirty ones are the emotions, the feelings, the attitudes. They're quick. They not only see the world a certain way, but they get you moving. Right? Right? They don't wait. Why? Well, it's bad to wait, if in fact that really is dangerous. Now, if you were able to adjust your feelings so that when the thing was really dangerous, you got out of there. When it wasn't, you weren't so, your feelings themselves, not your thinking, but your feelings themselves were calibrated properly so that they responded to the real value of the things in front of you. You see threatening people as threatening. You see harmless people as harmless. You see friendly people as friendly. You see, right? And the same with everything. You see real threats as real threats. And I'll just think about that. Most of the issues that we face in our moral and political lives aren't about people's beliefs. They're about people's antecedent emotions and feelings, which color their beliefs and hold them in place even when there's a massive amount of evidence. Right? So this is so take somebody who's a Holocaust denier. There are people who are Holocaust deniers. They think that there just isn't enough evidence to prove that there were ever extermination camps of the Jews. And a thought you could have is, well, look, we just need to give them more evidence. So this is a famous, now infamous historian who denied that there was Holocaust. And he was actually, he put someone on trial for saying that, he was a bogus historian. He sued them for libel in British court, and the person who wrote it had to face him off in a trial, and there was a, confrontation of him with all kinds of evidence. There never were any chimneys in this building, so how could they have, right? Here are aerial photographs, right, showing